You've established your expectations and relationships, but things still aren't quite working. How do we make the expectations we've set actually happen? How do we encourage them? Establishing expectations and relationships is an essential first step, and it's necessary, but it's not enough on its own for creating classrooms that work. In this framework, we focus on two approaches to encourage the behaviors we want to see in class, and I've made them really easy to remember. First is encourage before, things we do before a behavior to make it more likely to happen. Second is encourage after, things we do after a behavior. Under each of these two categories are a variety of interventions that have been studied and shown to work. But before we get into those, we need to review a little bit of behavior science, a few key principles that this framework follows, and we need to agree on some vocabulary as we move ahead. When I think about behavior, I think of it as happening in three parts: before, during, and after. Often we just focus on the behavior, what it looks like or what it is. But in establish, encourage, respond, we see behavior as consisting of three parts: the events that signal or occasion the behavior itself, and the effect the behavior has on the individual, others, and the environment. For the most part, behaviors do not spontaneously happen. They're a response to something. Sometimes that signal is internal, like a feeling or sensation. Sometimes that signal comes from the environment, from other people or things around us. In psychology and behavior support, these are often called antecedents, and you might also hear them referred to as triggers or signals. In schools, we're trying to enhance the signals for expected behaviors and change, eliminate, or minimize the signals for the unexpected behaviors, the ones we want to see less of. Just like when we talked about building relationships, with antecedents, we're trying to be really intentional about those signals. How we approach students, how we ask them to do something, how we arrange our classroom. These are carefully chosen to encourage those behaviors we want to see more of. Again, in psychology and behavior support, these are often called antecedents, but in this framework, I call it encourage before. Now, what happens after a behavior also sends a signal about whether that behavior should happen again. If a behavior leads to something helpful or positive for the student, that behavior will, over time, happen more. If it leads to something unhelpful, it may happen less. In psychology and behavior support, when something happens after a behavior and that behavior increases, we would say that behavior has been reinforced. These things that happen after can be something that is added or taken away. For example, if a student meets expectations, we might add praise and the expected behavior happens more. That behavior has been reinforced. If a behavior happens more because something is taken away, that behavior is also reinforced, just in a slightly different way. And if something is added or taken away and it has no effect on the behavior or makes the behavior happen less, then reinforcement has not occurred. But in the encourage part, we're only focusing on making behaviors happen more. There's a few good reasons for this, the biggest being that students tend to repeat what works for them. This highlights a really important idea. Reinforcement is identified by its effect on behavior, not our intent. So in encourage after, we're focusing on that principle. What are we doing after we see an expected behavior so they happen more often? Sometimes people feel strongly about this topic. Many people disagree with rewarding behavior, and I understand their position, but that's not what we're talking about here. I'm not telling you that you need to give candy or points to increase behavior. What I'm asking you to do is understand this relationship. If something happens after a behavior and that behavior increases because of it, it's being reinforced. Once we agree on that, we can decide how to reinforce based on what aligns with our context and our values. If candy or points align with those values, then I can teach you how to use those well. If not, then we can learn other ways to reinforce. To summarize, in the encourage part of the framework, we're focusing on encouraging behavior both before and after it occurs. When we encourage, we're building on our established expectations and relationships. Later in respond, we'll add what we do when behaviors do not meet expectations. In other words, how to discourage the behaviors we don't want to see. In later videos, we'll also look at specific strategies that fall under the encourage part of the framework. Subscribe so you can see all of these. Also, check out the video on the psychology of student behavior to explore this topic more.